Pro.Gnosis, a podcast with Àrmunn Rìgh.
Welcome, everyone. Here's Pro.Gnosis, episode 5. We have a returning guest, Tim Ozman from the IPS. Like we said in the previous episode, we would probably make a series, and here we are. The previous episode was more focused, or at least it started there, on the tarot cards as symbolism vehicles, let's say, where we analyzed not only their more esoteric meaning, but also world stage correspondences. But today we'll probably start with a holiday that is coming up, May Day for some, for others it's Beltane. So what brought this idea to discuss, Tim?
I wanted to discuss this as an example of the overlap between the pagan, archaic worldview and the modern world, which I contend mainstream media has supplanted religion. Not just religion, but the esoteric, the pagan basis for it all, where it gets into animism and the astrotheological. So my contention here is that a lot of the pagan holidays, these high points in the year, are grafted onto the mainstream events in such a way that they can tap into all of the matrix batteries. And when I say they, I mean the priesthood, the old priesthood that's the new priesthood. And by looking at May Day, we can kind of see, well, is there any overlap between what we see the masses doing on May Day and the pagan holiday of Beltane? And I like to point out that the overlap here is the International Workers' Day, major left-wing communist holiday globally, where you can have people around the world gathered en masse chanting slogans. They're going to have certain colors. They're going to be gathered around certain monuments. And to me, all these are, I think, subject from our perspective to analysis as perhaps being pagan rites disguised as mere political.
And maybe it's one of those holidays that get a whole, week, or the celebrations aren't just confined to that day. Because, for example, we have seen the Burning Man in the news already, right? So, and we have seen that strange ritual with the horses in London. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that they are already in that way symbolically celebrating Beltane?
Oh yes, there's a build up to it, and Beltane is typified by bonfires, which is all symbolic of resurrection, the new year, death, rebirth, all the same themes that you see. But the bonfires are one of the standout symbols that you'll see, and the ceremonies may not necessarily be on that specific day. There's sort of like a period of time that you'll tend to see it, and what I'm looking at is 419 seemed to be kind of when it all started. And that day is the day of the Oklahoma incineration. It's the day of the Waco incineration, and then this Burning Man. And I think, and then you also had the Copenhagen fire on their oldest stock exchange. So all these things I think are part of this ritual, which has to do with fire and immolation, sacrifice, these being the themes. And so I'm looking at all these riots and these protests happening across the country, specifically at Columbia University, as having a double meaning.
Yes, and the Copenhagen fire was one day after, I believe, or one day earlier than the Notre Dame, on a different year, of course. So it seems to be a recurring theme around this time. So certainly connected with this holiday that is seems to be very dear to the religion of the elites, and also, of course, then it links to Azarello, the Burning Man, and it's getting a bit obvious in my view that although mostly I don't follow news, eventually these things come to our laps, and we have to take a look, whether we want it or not, one way or another. And it seems that it had, like in previous years, an early start. Now, what is your idea about the mind effect, let's say, that these celebrations, let's call them like that, these symbolic celebrations in the media representing the religion, have on the populace?
My contention here, well, one, they are based in this philosophy of Hermeticism, as above, so below, meaning they are reenacting on Earth, anthropomorphizing the celestial realm. And
Mhm.
this interaction, this harmony, is how they are able to, quote, tap into the universe, their synchronization with it. So, what it looks like to me are ceremonies, which are ritual ceremonies. They're kind of the same thing, but I think ceremonies are more about the elaborate recreation. And what I
Mhm.
think they do with these ceremonies is they communicate in archetypes and symbols to our entire spectrum of consciousness, not just our ego awareness, but our subconscious. And I think
Mhm.
that these rituals are communicating to us en masse, as a mass mind, as a hive, and that they're speaking past and over our egos. So when we're engaged, we're feeding their ritual wittingly or not. And I would point to New Year's as an example of this. New Year's Day is perfectly coordinated with the dog star, and it's high point in the year, and then it's fall starting at midnight, the ball dropping, the countdown. So the idea that we're all synchronized to the pagan calendar isn't really abstract. We can actually prove it's tangible. And I think it's,
Mhm.
like you alluded to, it's unavoidable. It's inescapable. You're a matrix battery as long as you're not aware of it and blindly following. And I have a number of books on the topic of magic, and I've been researching the theory behind group magic. And it is not necessary for the participants to be aware of the meaning of the sigils in the room.
Yes, and it links. I showed you a video before we started, and I think it links nicely with the idea showed in the video. I'll put it in the description as well, which is that the left brain and the right brain have two very distinct ways of working, and even we could call them personalities, although I don't think that's accurate. And in the video, it is depicted how, for people who had, for one reason or another, they debate that it was an old treatment for epilepsy, cut down the connection between the left and the right brain, that they would manifest different wills, even from the left side of the body and the right side of the body. So the left side is controlled by the right brain, and the right side is controlled by the left brain. And one of the things that was, since I saw that video, that stuck with me was that if you cover one of the eyes and you look at an empty table while the other eye is closed, for these people that have this disconnect, they will say that there is nothing there, when in fact the other eye, let's say the other brain, is detecting a symbol, an object, or whatever, and probably won't be even aware, especially if it's the right brain, because it doesn't lodge any capabilities of language. And another interesting thing that I think is mentioned in that video is the fact that the right brain, usually associated with the feminine side, let's say the feminine part, the feminine energy, plays along. So since it realizes that it cannot take the lead role at all, it tries to either steer things to what it feels it's best, or play along with whatever is guided by the left brain. And I think that that is very much key to these ceremonies that you are describing, these rituals, and the fact that they even mention that it's not necessary to be aware, and awareness in this case would be the left brain, the one that has language, of what is going on. What would you say to that, Tim?
Yes, certainly. The left brain would be associated with the sun, the solar, the logical, the light, and it is the active male. So when we say masculine, feminine in this context,
Hmm.
it's active and passive. And so the goddess is represented by the chalice, which is a cup that holds, whereas the male is represented by the dagger, the penetrative.
Hmm.
And the idea of the sword and the dagger, they cut, they make decision or incisions. And the word incision and decision imply the cutting away of options. It's a very decisive thing. So when you get into even the etymology of it, the symbolism makes it pretty clear: active, passive, and the subconscious mind is the passive mind that it absorbs. I think it's absorbing everything that we consciously miss. And it's a
Yes.
repository of all the programming they've dumped into us, everything we haven't consciously processed. And that's why I think the work of alchemy is described by Jung with the sun and the moon, because the act of becoming aware of one's total self means the sun has to light
Yes.
the darkness, and you create that synthesis. And from that, in the symbolism, it's like Isis and Osiris, and then the new sun is born, and that's the new you when you've integrated the dark side. So there's a body of symbolism that suggests that it's been known, at least by these mystery schools, the nature of our two selves. One self is controlled, one is the wild. And if you look at all the goddess symbolism and God, various gods of nature, there's a wildness. Dionysus, Pan, and delirium is kind of associated with this, and it all pertains to the realm of the lunar and lunacy and
Hmm.
the unprocessed content of the mind.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I do think that of course, it is also an imposition to cause fear, but I do think that also the continuous depictions, or at least continuous promotion of an end times, is exactly to prevent an internal end times, an internal apocalypse or Armageddon, if you like, where one would have to confront oneself with that unresolved part that is there, that is silent, that can't really come to the fore and manifest in a direct manner. And so to prevent that, the left brain has to be like overwhelmed with information, with action, even, do this to be a proper citizen, things of that sort, proper behaviors to completely shut down that information that would come from the right brain. And of course, I am linking that to um, what we mentioned before in the previous episode about the higher self.
Yes, absolutely. And the higher self, we have the in psychoanalysis they like use terms like the id to
Hmm.
describe what you could call the lower self, and then the superego to describe what might be your what the higher self possibly, or some
Hmm.
self that isn't tied specifically to the bestial. But yeah, I think that the symbolism makes it pretty clear, and I think it's fascinating here how you look at something like in objectivism. There's a number of articles where Ayn Rand speaks about this distinction between Apollo and Dionysus, where she
Hmm.
describes the rational mind, the Apollonian mind leads us to the space program, technology, going to space, and then the Dionysian led to Woodstock and an atavistic resurgence, just running around in the mud and pagan orgies and drugs and the loss of self. And so she made this strong distinction between the solar and the lunar, or the left and the right, in that sense, being, of course, this distinction between order and chaos. And for one to confront the dark side, they do have to, of course, relinquish a lot of that control. And with that,
Yes.
ego death. And this is something I find intriguing here is, we talk about the idea of spirit descending into matter and this soul spirit dichotomy, but we're not only light encased in flesh, which is something of a prison, but there's the mental prison that I think is
Hmm.
even more difficult to overcome than the physical, and it's specifically the ego and the inability to admit one is wrong. I think that can be more confining to the soul than the body.